My conversation today is with author, tarot practitioner, and iconographical researcher Christophe Poncet. Christophe's research on the Tarot of Marseille has produced groundbreaking conclusions that the images crafted in the major arcana of the Marseille Tarot, though connected to a French city but of 15th century Italian origin, encodes Platonic allegories. Anyone familiar with the Platonic dialogues would be extremely hard-pressed to deny that many of the trump cards display images which find their origin in unique and highly specific Platonic symbolic narratives. Christophe demonstrates his fascinating journey in a much-praised documentary entitled The Mysteries of the Tarot of Marseille, and has begun publishing his extensive findings in 3 volumes entitled The Tarot of Marsilio, alluding to Marsilio Ficino, who famously translated the Platonic corpus from Greek to Latin in 15th century Florence, Italy. We sat down to discuss his fascinating and important discoveries, his upcoming volumes elaborating the findings of his research, his tarot practice, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. Fantastic. Christophe Poncet, thank you so much for joining me tonight on the Arcanum Podcast. It is a real pleasure to have you here with me, and I'm looking forward to talking tarot. It's not something that we discuss as often as other things on the podcast, and you have some singular insight into the tarot, which is my preferred method of divination, believe it or not. But clearly from your work, we have seen it goes far beyond divination, which I love. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to share this moment with you and to talk about all this. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, as I guess the first appearance on the podcast, I'm sure plenty of people are familiar with you, but for those who aren't, I guess, how did you get involved with the tarot?
Okay. It started about 41 years ago. It was my 19th birthday. And my girlfriend at that time offered me a tarot game for my birthday. And I was amazed, because I had been reading cards for my friends with ordinary decks of cards, but there I was amazed by these wonderful images, and I thought, wow, what a fantastic instrument. And I started reading the cards using this tarot. It was a Tarot de Marseille, of course. And after some time, I realized that I didn't have the meaning of the cards. They told something, of course, but it was not crystal clear. And I wanted to go further in their understanding of what they meant. And so I started an inquiry, first looking only into the cards themselves and trying to make sense only by comparing them together, what they could mean. And, oh, wow, this one is frightening and this one looks pretty cool, and, kind of things. And then I started making measurements, comparing colors and comparing designs and compositions and all that. And so I imbibed the structure of the tarot only by an observation of the details of the cards themselves. But then I realized that was not enough, and that there are archetypes, of course, and you have, for example, the sun, and okay, the sun is a principle of life, and it's a principle of light, etc. But then, and you have that in many civilizations, but then the precise meaning of the sun differs according to the regions and the places where you are. So I realized that I couldn't have a precise notion of what that sun meant unless I would know when and where this precise sun had been designed. And of course, the problem is that these cards, the early ones, have all disappeared. When you play cards, well, you wear the cards, and after some time, you just throw the deck away. And so the early cards have all disappeared. We don't know what these decks look like, the early decks, except for some ones, but not the Tarot de Marseille. They didn't survive. And so we didn't know when and where these cards were made. And I thought to myself, well, there's one thing that changes all the time and that differs according to the regions. It's fashion, the way people dress. And so I started observing the cards and compared these costumes with works of art to determine at what time these cards had been made. And I realized that it was very coherent, and all these costumes could be dated to the end of the 15th century, around 1470, 1480, in the northern half of Italy. Wow, that was a first result. And then, for some strange reason, at that time, I was reading the works of Plato. I had fallen in love with the Symposium, and then, I said, this is just fantastic. I need to read all Plato. And so I started reading the dialogues from the beginning, from the early aporetic dialogues until the laws and the more sophisticated and more difficult ones. But then, while I was reading, I realized that Plato's images corresponded with some of the tarot cards. I was amazed. For example, one very typical example is the chariot. You have in the Phaedrus the chariot of the soul, and there it was under my eyes, with the nasty horse, well, the better horse and the worst horse, and the charioteer, and well, it was like a photo of Plato's text. And I kept reading the dialogues and putting marks and signs everywhere. I found Platonic images that evocated the tarot trumps. And at the end, my volumes were full of marks and signs. And so at that point, I wondered what was the relationship between the northern half of Italy in the 1470s and Plato. What did it make sense? I had not been trained in philosophy, so I just. And then I realized that 1470 is precisely the time when Plato's works were revealed to the Western world, because until that date, Plato was still alive, but only in the eastern part of the world. And in Florence, around 1470, 1480, 1460, 1480, a man named Marsilio Ficino was given the task to translate by the Medici, in Florence, given the task to translate the complete works of Plato. And he does it, and with an extreme talent. But the publication is not immediate, because the problem is that religion at that time, the church, the Western church, Rome, does not like Plato at all. He has a very bad reputation. There are all these homoerotic, herotic stories, and they don't like that very much. But there's also the theory of ideas, and Plato's theory of ideas. And the church doesn't see how to manage that with the Christian doctrine. So here, Ficino has a difficult time, and I think, well, this is my theory, that at that point, Ficino needs to communicate his research, his work, to a circle of friends. Not everybody, a close circle of friends. And he wants to do it the way Plato would have done it. And to teach in the Platonic sense, you have to make it playful. And that's the concept of serious game that was practiced in Plato's academy. And Ficino, in my opinion, wants to do the same. He wants to create a game with which his friends and him can play, and playing, learn the concepts, the theories, the doctrine of Plato and of his followers, the Neoplatonists, and of the pre-Socratics, because, of course, translating Plato, he has to dig into the pre-Socratics, and also the culture of his time, Christianity, of course, because he needs to reconcile Platonism with Christianity, and he does it very well. And also the vernacular poetry of his time, especially Dante, which is very important in the Florentine culture at that time. And so once I had identified this man, Marsilio Ficino, born in 1433, died in 1499, so it's really the Quattrocento. I started reading not his translations, because obviously he did a fantastic job in translating Plato's works. His translation lasted and were still in use in the 19th century. It's really brilliant translations. But he gives with each translation a commentary. And so these commentaries are the place in which Ficino reconciles the Platonic theory with Christianity. And here, reading these commentaries, I realized that the tarot cards illustrated not so much Plato's images than Ficino's conception, transformed, Christianized versions of Plato's images. And this is striking, for example, in the chariot card. In the chariot card, you have these horses, and you see that really there's the better horse, as Plato says, the better horse, and he's looking straight in front of him, and his clear eyes, and he's has a beautiful body, and you have the worst horse, and he has bulging eye, and the other eye is closed, and he's looking the wrong way, and he's shaggy. His ears are like those of an angry horse, when they turn the ears backwards. But one thing that you have in the card and that you don't have in Plato, it's the fact that they are like Siamese twins. They don't have hindquarters. They are like just two front parts glued, sticked together. And that you have in Ficino's commentary, where he says that they are like Siamese twins. And because in his conception, he doesn't want evil to be something different. That's heresy to have two principles. He wants only one principle. And so in his conception, the two horses needs to be indissoluble, tied together forever. And that's what he says in his commentary. And so
it's absolutely fascinating, a lot of this stuff. And you put together a documentary, The Mysteries of the Tarot of Marseille. When was that released? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it was released in 2015.
Yeah, it was it is superb quality documentary, like the documentaries I grew up watching. When there was that quality to it, the historical quality, the narrative quality, the quality of research, the quality of even the film. So really an outstanding production. That's really what got me very interested in your work as well. So it's I commend you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's available on YouTube now, and we were fortunate because a French broadcaster bought the documentary and co-produced it, and that's why we had some budget, and we could allow us for traveling, and we went to Hungary to film some frescoes attributed to Botticelli, which correspond to tarot cards. And we also went to Italy and toured in Milan and in Florence, obviously, and we could film many things. Some libraries were opened to us in which we could film the manuscripts of Plato, the first manuscripts which the Medici had gotten from Greece at the beginning of the Quattrocento, when Gemistus Platon went for the Concile of Florence. And so, indeed, it was a rich documentary. However, at that time, my research was in its early stages, and also the format of 52 minutes is rather short, and so I could deal only with a few cards. And since then, so almost 10 years have passed, I carried on my research, and now I'm going to publish the result of all this research and to talk about each and every of the 22 trump cards. And the difficulty with that research is that it can be criticized on every single point. When what I told you about the chariot, you can tell me, well, it's a coincidence. It looks like the chariot, Plato's chariot, but it's a coincidence. But then, if you manage to have similar results for each and every of the 22 trump cards, then you have a coherence. And that's what gives you a sense that you are on the right path and that the theory or the hypothesis is right. And there's an American philosopher, sociologist, Dewey, who wrote his theory of inquiry, and he explains that what truth is coherence. It's coherence, and the wider the coherence, the greater the chances are that you have something true. And
It's very
so
it's very Platonic. It's funny. I was reading the Theaetetus just a couple of days ago, actually, and going through this. I'm a diehard Platonist as well. You know, I grew up reading those dialogues. My father, who was Greek, you know, he reared me on that kind of stuff. So I didn't really get a lot of the kids' books. So I went straight into Plato. But what's fascinating to me is the correlation between the Florentine Renaissance, right, and the broader Italian Renaissance, you know, seeing as you demonstrate the relationship between Sandro Botticelli and Marsilio Ficino, and obviously the Academy, the New Platonic Academy, seeing that relationship and seeing all the art, right? I mean, it was like the uh, philosophical, the religio philosophical canons of the old world finally came back at that time, you know, because you also had him and Lazzarelli doing the Corpus Hermeticum. Ficino wasn't really a fan of he was disappointed. He only translated a little bit of the Corpus Hermeticum, and then the Lazzarelli finished. He did the whole thing, and he really adopted, it seems, he was the one who incorporated more of the Hermetic stuff into his Christian identity. And you had of course, you know, Pico and all that stuff, but the main point that I'm trying to get here is the imagery, the art, the symbols, which if you go to Florence, or you go to even, you know, a place like the Vatican, right, in Rome, and there's such nuance, you know, Michelangelo obviously having done the Sistine Chapel. And if you read Plato, it's filled with imagery. It's an extremely graphic sort of narrative, the divided line and the allegory of the cave and the analogy of the sun and the charioteer in the Phaedrus, as you're saying. He's constantly painting these symbolic pictures because, as Plato says, or he says through his, you know, interlocutors like Socrates, like Timaeus, in the Timaeus, he says, look, we can only talk about these things so much. So we need to use images, and part of that is, right, mythos, mythology, mythologizing. A mythos is not fake, it's a symbol, right? So it's the two of them work so perfectly together. That's why when I heard about what you had discovered and started talking about, my mind exploded.
what you are saying is it's exactly what happened, and Ficino uh, tells about it in his introduction to his complete works of Plato. He says exactly what you just told. That is, for him, the language of Plato has different layers, and the first layer is pleasure. It brings you pleasure, so that you are enticed to go on further and to carry on reading, and then there is the idea of prophecy. This language is not just a human language, it's a divine language, and it's prophetic. So it's not like Aristotle, which the scholastics were used to dealing with and where you have to keep your reason functioning and only the reason, and there's no room for imagination. And it's exactly the contrary for Ficino. For Ficino, thinking needs to be both rational and irrational, and you need these two ways to get to the divine, and that's what he wants to do. His objective is properly theologic. His idea is to reach the divine through the mind, and reaching the divine through the mind supposes that you have to exert both your rational and your irrational faculties. And what's extraordinary with again this chariot image in the tarot is that it absolutely illustrates this in a very interesting manner, because you have the head of the charioteer, and he has a crown, and he has shoulder plates that are like two faces. And it corresponds to a commentary of Ficino on the Phaedrus, where he says, well, he says this elsewhere, but it's an important point in his thinking, is that the only way to reach God is to use the apex mentis, the top of our mind. And apex in Latin means crown. So this higher point of our mind is the one that can connect to the divine. But then we have our intellect, and this is the head of the charioteer. But then we have the circuits of reason on one side, with one head that looks towards the ideas, and the other head, which is the irrational head, and it looks rather toward the imaginary world on one part, and also onto nature. And so this image is like a diagram of the human soul being an instrument to reach God.
Yeah, and it's fascinating too, because when you look at the Neoplatonic tradition, particularly with Iamblichus and also with Plotinus, I think a lot of people don't understand Plotinus because he didn't think that his writings were going to be preserved, A, and B, you know, the Enneads is bigger than the Bible. So, I mean, who's really gotten through it? You know, so I'm not going to
Ficino. He translated
exactly
the complete work of Plotinus.
Yeah.
He was the first to do it.
Yeah, him and John Dillon.
Again, with commentaries and everything, and it's fascinating work. It's published in 1492. And he also translated Iamblichus on the Egyptian mysteries.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing, is that Iamblichus is really the one who starts insisting on the mysteries. The Greeks are over rationalizing it. It has become too Aristotelian, really, the philosophia. So what he's talking about with theurgy, to your point, is that there is the nous, you know, or let's say the logistikon, the rational part of the soul, can get you only so far. And then there has to be a point in the ritual, and what comes in that state, right? The ecstatic state, ecstasis, to stand outside of yourself, is supra-rational. It's not just antithetical, it's above it. It's higher than reason. And you know, Dr. Shaw does a great job in his last book, Hellenic Tantra, the asema onomata, you know, the meaningless words. And Iamblichus is saying they don't need to have meaning. It's supposed to put you in a state that's more than rational. This is a sine qua non of theurgy. You can't do it without that. And again, I believe in P.D. Newman, in his book Theurgy, Theory and Practice, that came out, he uses he makes reference to the theurgic analogy of a charioteer and how riding through the celestial spheres.
We have it in Parmenides also.
Right, exactly. The only part of his head, the only part of his body that can go into the noetic realm is his head. Again, so it's that sort of thing where it's only the top can go, only the highest part of the news. So yeah, it's all very much it's very much in there. I'm interested, what I really like that I wanted to ask you about. I kind of understood what you talked about, and it was a beautiful demonstration. I think again it was Sandro Botticelli's Lucifer from maybe the Inferno
Yeah.
or the Divine Comedy. But this is something that's very, very central to the Platonic idea of soma sema, the body as a tomb, and the descent of the soul in materiality. And you illustrated it very well in the documentary, and I'm sure you're going to do an even better job, or a more thorough job in the book, which I want to talk about also. But what are your thoughts on particularly that picture, and do you see it as like a tripartite structure, the same way as the comedy, or how are you? I mean, this is just a very personal interest. I'm interested personally for what you have to say about this.
Absolutely. The tarot structure is three-tier. I discovered a text in Ficino's commentary on the Timaeus, which is a cryptic text. That is to say, if you read it in the continuity of the commentary on Timaeus, then suddenly you realize that it doesn't make sense. It's not related to what's said before, and it's not related to what's said after. And this, it's a big paragraph, it's a page, about a page, begins with the idea that the soul is a triple septenary. And it ends, it's like a chiasm, it ends with the same notion of a triple septenary. And in between, you have these lines, about 30 lines of text, in which there are astrological concepts appearing, but then you realize that it's the description of a structure like a table, which has 3 levels and 7 columns, and each of the columns is a planet, one of the planets of the Ptolemaic system, and the 3 levels are the lower level, of course, the terrestrial level, the higher level, the celestial level, realm, and in between, the intermediary level. So, and you can put each and every trump card in its place. So each card is corresponds to a planet and a level. And for example, you have the 3 Venusian cards that are at the bottom, the lovers. At the intermediary level, you have the star, and at the upper level, you have the Popus. It's a long job to explain why and how, but the 2 superior Venuses correspond to Plotinus's vulgar and higher Venus. And the lower card shows the man in this world making a choice between the 2 Venuses. And the one Venus, the upper Venus, is the Popus, and of course it's Isis, and it's the intellect, the divine intellect, and the other Venus is nature, which is the motor of generation. There's no generation without nature, and nature is the product of the generation. So this young man you have at the bottom of the card, the lover has to make his choice between the two different Venuses. And so that's how we see how Ficino really takes his substance from Plato, from Plotinus, and how he makes it into an image. At that time, there was a revival of Egyptomany and Horapolo, the hieroglyphs, and there was this idea that the Egyptians had created their hieroglyphs. They didn't know what they were exactly, but they had this idea that they embedded the truth, a multi-leveled truth, into a single image that that was almost empowered with the content it presented. And so I think that's what Ficino's ambition was. He wanted to create his own hieroglyphs that at the same time could reveal some truth and at the same time also could act and could have power. In his treatise on life, the De Vita, he talks about talismans. And obviously, in this book, he has to be prudent because the church didn't like the use of talismans. And so he says, some say that we can create talismans and they embed the powers of the stars and they can be used at precise moments. And you have to engrave it into metal and certain types of metals, etc. So he gives the instructions to make these images. Not saying he would have made them, but obviously it's clear that it was his ambition. And he succeeded because look how these tarot de Marseille were used since the 18th century. For many years, they were not used anymore for spiritual practices. But then suddenly, in the 18th century, they are rediscovered in France. And Cour de Gébelin and Etela, they see these images and they say, wow, these images are hieroglyphs of the Egyptians. And they contain philosophical truth, spiritual truth, and we need to read them and to dig into it, to absorb their magnificent truth, and that's what they do. They are wrong because, of course, they ascribe it to the Egyptians. And indeed, the Egyptians have a role to play, but it's mediated through Ficino. They couldn't imagine that relay, but in a sense, they were right. They were right in seeing what they really mean. And the interesting part is that today, the doxa on the tarot de Marseille and every other kind of tarot is that it never was used before the 18th century for any other practice than playing cards. And when you realize what they embed, you cannot stay on that opinion, obviously.
Yeah. And it is amazing how the awareness that something was there, something numinous was there, was kind of awakened in Cour de Gébelin and Atelier. I think Code de Gebelon was the first one to ascribe each of the tarot trumps to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And then around that time, you have, or really, 16th century, you've got Athanasius Kircher talking about how the Hebrews and the Egyptians were in such close proximity that they adopted the same rites. So it was very interesting to see how that came alive. And then, the Golden Dawn, uh, ascribing those astrological and planetary and elemental correspondences. So it was, like you're saying, it was almost like pieced back together. It wasn't perfect, but it was really pieced back together. So how much of this do you talk about, or what are some other aspects of this in your work? You've released the first volume, right, of the Tarot of Marsilio.
It's going to be released next month.
Great.
It's in pre-sale, but it's not physically released yet.
Mm-hmm. So 3 volumes, and
Three volumes.
first one will come out. And how much more of the work do you elaborate on in this? By the way, I can't wait to sink my teeth into it.
Well, the first volume deals with the lower level, and so of course, it explains the whole inquiry and how I reach the conclusions which I give, but it gives there's not one meaning, of course, but they give the explanation of the intellectual process that lies behind each of the trump cards that are on the lower levels, which explains the title of this first volume, down here, because it's the world in which we live, and these cards are the Chariot, and then you have the Devil, which is an illustration of Plato's cave, but Christianized with the devil. Then you have the lover, the lovers, and then strength, hermit, Arcana 13, which has no name.
Right. Yeah, the
And
nameless arcana. Yeah.
nameless arcane, and I explain why it doesn't have a name, and with it the card which doesn't have a number, and it's the Fool, and the Tower. And so this is the first volume. The second volume will deal with the cards of the 2 upper levels. So I'm not going to list them, but there are 14 cards, and there's a lot to say about really each card. Has there are cards with there's always a story to be told, and there's always a narration. There's always a travel. Each card is a travel from its superficial aspect, which can please us or frighten us, but it's only an upper crust, and then you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and at the end, it's like in the aporetic dialogues of Plato. In the end, you don't know what it means, but you have many tools to get to other cards, and that's where we get to the process of reading the cards. But that's another story which we can talk later. The third volume will go through all the cards one more time, but read through the structure of 3 times 7, which I told you about, and which deepens once more the meanings, because then you can relate each card to its layer and its level. And of course, obviously, it doesn't have the same way to read a card of the heavenly level than one of the earthly level. It's just doesn't work the same. And so that's for these 3 volumes.
Wonderful.
Once these 3 volumes will be published, I will do another volume on the minor arcana, of
Oh,
course.
wow.
Yes, because they also have their meaning, and there's a lot of Pythagoras in it,
Oh, that's great.
obviously, and numerology, but also symbols, and it's quite interesting. And once this will be done, I would like to write an art of reading the cards.
Mm,
Because the
that's
reason why I went into this inquiry was to better read the cards. Now, I think really this uh, inquiry gives an enormous amount of keys for the card readers.
mhm,
It gives the hooks that tie each card with the others.
mm,
And given this, of course, you would do it. Good card readers did it intuitively.
mm,
Their intuitions
mm,
uh, led them to make these connections. But now, really, it gives a basis
mm,
for connections that maybe you would have missed, or you would have maybe misinterpreted. And
mm.
now, really, it gives precision to the tool, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it's my ambition anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I mean, I was going to ask about your personal tarot practice, but really, I think what is more, I guess, apropos, given some of the stuff that we've spoken about already, because I don't, we're talking about tarot, so I don't want to get too academic. But
Okay.
uh, how is it that Platonic philosophy, mediated through somebody like Ficino, can relate to what the tarot in modern times is primarily known for, which is divination? How do you think? What is the mechanism behind that? That's a big question, but that's something I'd be interesting to hear at least some of your preliminary thoughts on.
That's a very interesting question. Because, of course, when I realized that Ficino had invented this deck, uh, I didn't think that he would have used it for divination himself. I really thought that for him it was a kind of um, game for learning, you know, as we have, and that was it. But he was an astrologer. He talks a lot about natural magic. And of course, he has this conception of images to be read. And as an astrologer, and as a man also used to read about oracles, and very documented on this subject, I think he couldn't miss the opportunity to invent this use of the game. Maybe not him, maybe others in the academy, but it's almost something that comes naturally. I have no proof for it, but Ficino often talks about oracles. He gives some names to oracles which we don't know of, and maybe sometimes I think he's hinting at the cards. Now we have to have in mind what was his conception of fate, and because it's important, if we talk about divination, to understand what kind of divination we are talking about. And he had a non-deterministic conception of astrology. For him, you always have your free will, and you always can exert it. So the hero for him is he who can dominate the stars. That is to say, the man that has the capacity to go over the conditions that were ascribed to him at birth and even after. And so, and that's now we arrive at my conception of card reading. And I don't call it divination for that reason. I don't think we can divine really, but I think we can show situations, and we can read through situations, and give indications on this situation and how to make sense of it, and how to make a better use of it. I mean, most of the time when you go to see a card reader, you are obsessed by a question, and you have a desire or a fear. And then when you read the cards, it helps you most of the time to go over the fear or the desire, and to see the situation with a wider look, and to get a better understanding of the whole situation. And with that meaning in mind, you realize that your question was just not important. And you see what's more important than the question you came with. So that's how I like to practice.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well in my own practice. Particularly, different decks seem to have different ways of speaking to you. And yeah, it's normally what I'll do is, well, one of the ways, and I've said this before, one of the ways when I got started reading tarot was do very simple 3-4 card spreads, and I asked myself, what are the energies or archetypes that I am going to encounter, for in this situation or today, etc. And then you get your spread, and based off of that, then I would ask, what should I use to mitigate or make the best of this? And then just a single card, because you don't want to beat them to death, because at that point you just don't like the answer you got. And a lot of times when there is a definite question, particularly when you're reading for yourself, yeah, I've noticed a lot of instances will be, well, this is the actual question you should be asking. You're asking this question, but
Exactly. This is it.
This is what's important, and you focused on something else here. But yeah, I had very interesting experiences with the tarot, and I went to see a tarot card reader, actually, very young. I was either 19 or 20 myself. I was just out of high school and first year of college, and I went with my girlfriend at the time. It was a very strange reading. The tarot um reader was insistent, and I may cut this out of the episode, but I think it's just interesting. I feel like I want to tell you.
Okay.
Um, he was insistent that it was me, a woman, my girl, my significant other, and then there's another man here, a young man. And I think I'm like, getting. He's like, "Are you in a love triangle?" I'm like, "No," you know. So then I'm I'm like freaking out in my head. I go sit down, fold my arms, like it's your turn. You go up. She goes up and he says the same thing to her. There's another, and she said, "No, no, 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 no." So she comes back and she tells me, and I was like, "Are you seeing somebody else?" I'm 19 years old. I'm like, "You seeing somebody else? Like, what's going on?" And she's like, "No, no, no. Like, why would I tell you what he told me?" She ended up like a month later being with the child. So,
Oh,
so
wonderful.
it blew my mind.
Oh, yes.
And I went back and found this guy and I said, "How did you do that?" Because and I did another reading and he said, "Look, I shuffle the cards, you pick them, and I read them." That's really so then I got really involved with tarot. I bought my first deck from a place in Manhattan because I grew up in New York. Little place called House of Cards and Curiosities in the West Village. Not there anymore. I got the Tarot de Marseille. It was my
Oh,
first deck.
the best deck.
And I'm sitting on the subway and I'm okay, shuffling. Show me me. Show me me. And I pull a card. I didn't know what to ask. And I pull a card, La Lune, right? I don't know what that means. But I get back to the apartment, maybe hour later, shuffling again. The whole deck. Shuffling. Show me me. Show me. La Luna. And then finally a third time in the park on Riverside Drive. And at that point, I was so spooked out, so utterly convinced of this that it's I've had a very deep connection to the tarot ever since then. Nothing has ever spoken to me in the same way that these cards do. So I'm always interested to hear other people that have more experience and broader research. And why do you think it is? What's going on here? It still blows my mind. Is it a talismanic quality to them? Are they enlivened somehow by the images? I don't know.
I don't know either. I, to me, it's just I see it works in some way. I cannot explain it.
Yeah.
I see it works. It
Yeah.
produces results
Mhm, mhm.
and interesting results. Um, the Tarot de Marseille embeds so much philosophy and so much knowledge that even if it has no prophetic quality, it helps. It gives you philosophical directions. It gives you, when I read the cards, I always try not to guess. I never want to guess anything. So what I say most of the time is meaningless for me. I'm not trying to make sense of it, but it speaks to the person to whom I'm talking, and quite often they say that it brings them something to feed with. It's like food for thought,
Mm, mm.
and no.
Well, the one of the last things that I wanted to ask you, we'll get to the canned questions. I have some canned questions that everybody gets at the end, but one of the things that I was wondering is what do you think? What are the the implications of tarot, in your opinion, today being its imagery being so altered and varied, innovated. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a tool. It's a tool, and the interesting thing with this tool, it's that it gives you a variety of combinations. It's a combinatory instrument. That's what's interesting. However, and it can be used whatever the image on the cards because of its combinatorial nature. But for me, the one that really embeds this philosophical meanings is the Tarot de Marseille. And some are derived from the Tarot de Marseille, the Rider-Waite, even, and most of the esoteric decks derive from the Tarot de Marseille, and rightly so. And for me, the less they derive from it, the better they are. And the more they derive from it, they have their interest. They are artistic, they are fun, they are erotic, and whatever. But for me, the one that can produce the best result is the Tarot de Marseille.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So the couple of canned questions. First, I just want to give you the opportunity to talk about anything or plug anything that you have coming up, whether that's a lecture or anything like that, or if you've got a website that you want to direct people to.
No, I'm obsessed with the publication of these 3 volumes, and that's really the thing I'm focused on, and I have no other immediate project.
Yeah, and I will link to the description and the pre-order of the book and your websites and socials in the about section of this video. The last question that everybody gets. We've talked today about philosophy, we've talked about history, we've talked about tarot, covered a good bit of ground as we normally do on the channel. Could you recommend to someone that has been listening to this maybe 3 books so that they can get started on either philosophy or the tarot or Ficino, etc.?
Okay. I prepared this question because I knew you were going to ask it.
You may be the first person to prepare this. I usually catch everybody by surprise.
Can you see this?
No, I don't see a little higher.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yep.
So it's a French edition of Plato's Symposium. But I suggest you read it in your own language. It's what got me started in Plato, and it's just a marvel, a literary marvel, and it's full of levels, reading levels, and it brings you to another world. It's just magnificent. So I recommend this book as a starting point into Plato. Second choice is to know about Ficino, the inventor of the Tarot de Marseille. There are 12 books of his letters that are published in English translation. The English translation is very good. And well, It's the world of the Renaissance. He writes letters to the Medici. He writes letters of advice to the princes. It's full of philosophy. It's funny sometimes, always very deep. And so I warmly recommend reading this if you're interested in this philosopher of the Renaissance, and it's probably the most important, more than Pico, more than any other Renaissance philosopher. And then I have a third book. I have the Italian edition. It's Culianu, Eros and Magic in the Renaissance. Maybe you know that one. He's a Romanian, and he was a pupil of Mircea Eliade.
One of my favorites, Eliade. Love him.
Oh yeah, and Culianu was very brilliant. He died. He was assassinated in Chicago in the 90s by probably the Secret Service of Romania, the Securitate, because he was against the regime at that time. And but he wrote very powerful things about magic in the Renaissance, and with reflections about what magic is today and how magic was stolen to the people by businesses, politicians, and that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Magic today mostly is black magic, the black magic of the politicians and of advertisement and communication and all that. And we really need to regain that power and make use of it to counter this nefarious use of magic that is mainstream today. And this book really helps us understand this evolution that happened since the last centuries. And it's
wonderful. That's
an
excellent.
amputation.
Yeah. Great recommendations. Thank you so much, Christophe Poncet, for sitting with me and just chatting with me. It's been a real pleasure. I hope to speak to you again very soon. And everyone, we all are looking forward to everything that you've got coming for us in the future. So again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ike. It was a great pleasure for me too.